My spoiled sister asked to borrow my new Mercedes for her road trip with her friends. I refused, but my parents gave her the keys behind my back. She came back from her road trip without my car, so I pulled the ultimate revenge on her. Part 2. I was seething with rage, unsure of what my parents would say, but as planned, I headed to their place to look for the car they claimed to have left out front, obviously. As expected, when I arrived at my parents' place, there was nothing but their own cars. I was utterly dumbfounded. To my surprise, despite it being past 10:30 p.m., my parents were waiting for me at the gate for some unknown reason. I approached them, furious, demanding to know what had happened to my car. They apologized profusely, explaining that my sister really needed it for her road trip to Spain, insisting on having my Mercedes. They suggested I could use their cars for the time being. They seemed overwhelmed, probably lacking the strength to say no to my sister. They tried their best to calm me down, but it was tough. Opening Instagram, I saw photos of her and her friends, whom I also despised, in my car. I felt a bit sorry for my parents, but they had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Nonetheless, I demanded they call my sister immediately, which they did. They tried to hand the phone to her, but she refused to speak to me. They got her to promise to return the car in the condition she found it, treating it as carefully as possible. I returned to my apartment, furious, but considering my parents' effort, I thought if she returned my car in good condition within 2 weeks, I'd let it go, for the sake of our relationship. Noticing my sister hadn't even followed me back on Instagram, days went by as I walked to work, constantly worried about my car because of my sister's utter irresponsibility. I often dined at my parents' since they were the only link to my sister and thus my car. Given her refusal to speak to me, I wanted to make her pay, but my parents said they were helpless. About a week into her trip, which she started 3 days early to ensure she had my car, I went to have dinner at my parents'. I couldn't explain why, but they seemed extremely anxious that day. They awkwardly assured me during dinner that everything was fine and the car was in good shape, but I sensed they were lying. It had been a week since she left, with 18 days until her return. I went home, planning to visit again in 3 days. During that time, I noticed my sister's stories no longer featured my Mercedes. When the day came, I asked my parents about the car. My mother burst into tears and ran upstairs. I started to fear the worst. My father looked me in the eye and bluntly stated that my car had been lost in Malaga. Devastated yet incredulous, I suggested checking local impounds. He explained that 2 days later, my sister had checked all nearby impounds, but none had any record of my car. It appeared to have been stolen. I asked my father one last time if this was some kind of joke. He replied that if it were, my mother wouldn't have left crying. I had saved for years to afford that Mercedes, and my pampered sister, who always had everything handed to her on a silver platter, had just destroyed my most prized possession. I knew this was a critical moment. I was determined to make her pay dearly. A memory flashed through my mind. As a child, when punished, my parents would often hide my belongings, like game controllers, to distract me. I headed for the small closet in the living room, where they used to hide my things. My father had gone to comfort my mother in their bedroom. Opening the closet, I found exactly what I needed, the keys to the new apartment my parents had bought for my sister for university. I was about to give her a taste of her own medicine. You can now check if there's a third part by pressing share and more.